Hey guys, so thanks for joining me today. My name is Kate Jaramillo. I'm a ketogenic lifestyle expert, a master group fitness instructor, and a mom of girls. And with me today, I have Bridget Casey, and I am so excited to talk to Bridget today about supplements. Bridget is a naturopathic doctor, and she is living in the Virginia area, and I am so excited to share with you guys all of her knowledge because she is super smart, and she is going to cover a topic that I think a lot of us have a lot of questions about, like what supplements we should be taking, if any, how they work into our diets, and how to choose the best supplements. So I'm going to hand this over to Bridget. Bridget, will you introduce your fabulous self to our audience today?
Of course. Hi, everyone. So as Kate mentioned, my name is Bridget Casey. I am a naturopathic doctor. I currently practice in Richmond, Virginia. So just to familiarize everyone a little bit with what that is, I practice family medicine, but from a more natural perspective. And I think, Kate, I don't know if you want me to explain a little bit more about kind of how
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm not sure how many people, like what people know about a naturopathic doctor and how it differs between a medical doctor.
Yeah, good question. So most people I find aren't super familiar with what it is that I do. So basically, we're trained in a similar fashion in that we go to 4 years of postgraduate medical school. So the first few years of training are very similar in learning how to diagnose illness and so forth. And that would be with like physical exam and labs and whatnot. The main difference is in the philosophy behind how we practice and then the interventions that we utilize. So the philosophy encounters a few different major pieces, but I would say the big ones are that we look at the person in front of us from a holistic standpoint. So, for example, when someone comes to see me for the first time, the visit is usually between 1 and 2 hours.
Wow.
So it's a lot longer and more in-depth and kind of thorough history taking that you probably experience when you see it in ND. And the point of that is to look at all the different pieces of the person in front of me, to try to put everything together and see, are there other underlying root causes behind the symptoms that that person is experiencing. So I would say sort of catchphrases that help sum up what I do is holistic medicine, and it's looking at the root cause of what's going on for someone.
Yes.
And then in terms of how we treat or what we utilize in terms of intervention. So I personally, and a lot of us do a lot of lifestyle counseling. So that's looking at nutrition, sleep, stress management, movement, all of the basics, the core that makes up healthy living, essentially. So we're certainly going to address those pieces, but then we'll also use natural therapies. So that would be things like herbs, which is also called botanical medicine.
Yep.
We can use homeopathy, which is a whole another system of medicine. And then nutritional supplements, which we're going to be talking about today. So those are kind of the main pieces, depending on what ND you see and what state they're practicing, and they may utilize other interventions like IV therapy or physical manipulation or things like that, but it kind of depends on the different restrictions in the state they're practicing it. So.
Oh, that is so amazing and so thorough. And I think like you just touched on so many important things about your role. And one of them is just the time that you spend with your patients and really going into root causes. Because I think that, you know, when I've been very open about this, that one of the big problems with the industry right now is that you see somebody, a doctor seeing you for like 5 minutes at tops. And they're, you know, just looking at a chart really quickly, seeing if you have a fever, what some general symptoms are, and giving you something that treats symptoms instead of addressing the core root of the problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks will kind of refer to that as Band-Aid medicine, if you will, or kind of putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms and not looking for why, you know, what is happening underneath. And, you know, I'm not here to poo-poo what anyone else is doing. I think there's limitations behind what we all do in practice. And there are a lot of reasons for things being the way they are, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, I find that it's, we tend to have more lasting results when we're treating from the underlying root cause perspective. And I find that folks are usually quite happy with the results, which is obviously the point. So.
Exactly. So I want to transition in to talk about supplements today. I feel like none of us really know what we're supposed to be doing. Are we supposed to be taking a multivitamin every day? If those of us that live in like really cold, like the North Pole, should we be taking a vitamin D supplement? If we are vegetarian or we hate to eat seafood, should we be taking omega-3s? Like, what should we be taking? Like, what are the supplements that you think are kind of like the most general, like the most generally beneficial ones, and which ones should we take and which ones should we avoid? Can we get, through our nutrition and life?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kate. This comes up a lot in my practice. A lot of folks come in either on a bag of supplements because they think they need to be taking everything, or other people are not taking anything because they don't know where to start. I think there's a few really important points I want to make before I go into some ideas. That would be at the outset, if someone is generally healthy, they don't typically need to take supplements. I think there's this sense that we all need to be on a bag of supplements every day to be healthy. I really want to stress that is typically not the case. Now, if someone has health concerns or issues that they're dealing with, typically those are the people I'm seeing. So often I will put them on supplements in order to help facilitate their body's healing process. But I do want to kind of hammer home that if you feel well, you're probably doing okay. You don't necessarily need to take supplementation.
That is so good to know. I mean, I really thought that like we should all be taking some sort of a multivitamin.
Yeah, and another key point in particular with multivitamins, they're not innocuous substances. So like anything you're putting in or on your body, it will have an effect, right? The supplement industry is not regulated. So that means that the quality of what you're getting could be all over the map. And there's no one that's really, including the FDA, there's not a lot of stringent regulations around what is being put in the supplement, where it's sourced from, whether or not what's listed on the label actually matches what's in the supplement, and that can happen a lot. So this is another big point I want to make to people. You may actually be doing yourself a disservice if you're taking poor quality supplements rather than not taking anything at all. So that's something to think about.
Oh, wow.
So this is where I do think it's useful to have a practitioner that you trust, whose opinion you can get on if there's a particular supplement or something that you're looking at, and I'll get into some tips for people on some things to look for. But I do want to mention that quality is super important, as with everything that you're ingesting, and that includes supplements. On a basic level, the supplements that you're getting from more of like a natural food store or like a Whole Foods or something like that, they at least have some level of quality control that they're typically doing. So you're going to find usually a little bit higher quality supplements from a place like that versus your typical drugstore or pharmacy.
Yeah.
And that's another important point as well. So quality and trust, that there's been some kind of third-party verification process. So for example, the supplements that I use in practice are all professional grade, third-party tested supplements. So I don't usually give people over-the-counter brands, and there are some that I like, and I can mention some, but
yes,
I'm not affiliated with any particular supplement companies, but just in order to help people maybe sort of in the process of figuring out things that they could try on their own.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful.
Yeah. What else did I want to mention? So quality is super important. Not everyone needs to be on supplements. And another big point is all the supplements in the world do not replace a good diet. And all of my patients have heard me say this, but I think that's another super important point to mention, is that your nutrition, what you're eating 2-3 times a day or more, is always going to trump what you're taking. So a lot of great supplements don't make up for a crappy diet, and vice versa. So think about that as well.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that. That is very, very true. And what about like lifestyle choices, as far as they relate to supplements? Like if somebody is having just a hard time falling asleep at night, should they be taking melatonin or?
That's a great question. It depends on the person. So, again, I'm looking at, okay, why are you having a hard time falling asleep? Is it a hormone imbalance? Like there's a reason for the melatonin cortisol balance to be off? Is it because they're super stressed out and worried and anxious about XYZ? Is it a physical sleep issue? Is there sleep apnea? There's a lot of different reasons for having trouble sleeping, right? So that's why it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for me to give blanket answers because there are so many different reasons someone could be dealing with a particular issue. But that's, again, comes back to what I sort of mentioned earlier is I really want to look at the lifestyle pieces. Are there things that we can do to really help someone with their sleep before we just knee jerk right to giving melatonin, for example? Not that melatonin is a bad thing. It's your natural sleep hormone. Typically, I try to, again, do things to support the body's ability to increase its own melatonin levels as opposed to supplementing with that, because then you can end up relying on the supplementation part of it. But an easy example why a lot of people have trouble sleeping would be using electronics, things with screens like computers and phones and TVs right up until bedtime. And I'm guilty of having done this myself. No one's perfect.
Oh, sure.
But most folks will notice that correlation, like, oh yeah, I was on my phone, flipping through Instagram, and all of a sudden I'm still laying in here in bed an hour later and can't fall asleep. Whereas last night I read in bed for half an hour before I went to bed and fell right asleep, right? So that's where, again, I really want to pull out the lifestyle pieces and kind of get to know what someone's day-to-day look like. What are their habits? What are they doing, so that we don't have to count on taking 45 pills a day. We can just sort of shift some of our habits maybe to help the body naturally do what it wants to do.
Yeah. What about vitamin D? I know that this is a vitamin that so many of us are deficient in, and we know it's kind of like the sunshine vitamin, and I live in Florida and I feel like I don't know that I'm getting enough vitamin D. How important is that to kind of supplement versus what we can do to make lifestyle changes to get enough vitamin D?
Yeah, that's a great question. So vitamin D is super important. There's been a lot of amazing studies on it in recent years about how important it is to the immune system and so forth. So having enough is definitely important. Vitamin D is naturally produced in your skin. So exposure to sunlight on your bare skin is how your body naturally has its own amount of vitamin D being processed or produced. You can get it through food, but it's pretty difficult. Like there's some mushrooms and certain things where you can get vitamin D through nutrition. But I would say by and large, sun exposure on the skin is the best way to get vitamin D. I won't get into all the sort of background, but a lot of people are concerned about like skin cancer and sunblock and all that, and that's kind of a whole other discussion. But in a general sense, think about, okay, we were all exposed to sun on a regular basis way back when our bodies evolved, and we're typically able to handle some sun exposure. And about like 15 minutes or so a day on maybe like 25% of your skin is enough for most people. Depending on your skin tone in certain latitudes and so forth, it can vary, but you kind of use that as like a baseline. Okay, so how do you know if you need it? So for someone, for example, someone who has a history of maybe seasonal depression, they may be more likely as someone who may need a little bit of vitamin D. But the best way to know is really to test. So you can super easily run a lab test for your vitamin D levels. Primary care doctors are pretty standardly running this now. So you could go to any of your PCPs and usually get that test done. What I usually have folks do is check it in the fall and the spring, because typically we're getting most of our sun exposure in the summer, right? And we're also, the sun's a little bit stronger that time of year. So if we're going to be deficient in vitamin D, it's typically through the winter months. So having a gauge on where levels are going into that season and then coming out of it is a nice sort of piece of information to know in terms of what your body trend is. And then you can supplement accordingly. So like the standard lab range is somewhere between 30 and 100. And for most folks, I find I do pretty well between 30 and 60 or something like that, 40 to 60. Some people, we may want to be a little higher, just kind of depends, again, what's going on for that. And in terms of supplementing, so if you're trying to increase your vitamin D levels, again, it would depend on what level you're starting from. But usually taking anywhere between 1 and 5,000 IUs a day will pretty readily increase someone's vitamin D level over a few weeks to a month.
Okay.
I don't typically find that folks need to necessarily do the super high dose pharmaceutical version of this. Part of that, the reason for that is typically the prescription is vitamin D2, whereas vitamin D3 is actually the natural form that your body utilizes.
Oh, that's good to know. So vitamin D3 is what we're looking for.
Yeah, so that would be more of the active version of vitamin D. And so when you're looking at your supplements, that would be something to consider looking for. And I mentioned that it can be a little bit difficult to get through food, but something else to note is in cod liver oil, which is like similar to a fish oil supplement, it will have some vitamin D there as well. Excuse me. So that might be something, yeah.
In purchasing a vitamin D3 supplement, is there anything that we need to look out for on the label?
Not particularly. So it's a fat soluble vitamin. So it's usually some kind of either in droplets as an oil or in capsulated oil. So anything that is a fat or is fat soluble, you want to be careful about oxidation. So you don't want it to be sitting in the sun in a clear bottle in the pharmacy. You want it to be in the light protected bottle. It shouldn't smell rancid when you open it. So you want it to be fresh, and I would recommend keeping it in a cool place. But it's always good to, if you're not sure, if it's not labeled on the product, to call manufacturers and ask, where are you sourcing this from? How do you produce your product, etc. Are you testing for heavy metals or other things? That's really important for fish oil in particular. And
should we keep them in the refrigerator to be a cool place, or is that too cold?
It's not necessarily too cold. You don't typically have to with the vitamin D. You can. I would recommend that with fish oils and cod liver oils to keep them in the fridge.
Okay. And anything that we should look out for with fish oils, because I know that some fish in different parts of the ocean are like contaminated now. So
yeah, this is a really tough one, and yeah, it's tough. It's hard to find clean fish these days, to be frank. So this is a really important one where I say, you want to know the sourcing of the material. So with a fish oil, of course, you want to know where the fish from, where they're being harvested. And as most people know, especially larger fish tend to accumulate heavy metals throughout their lifetime because they eat smaller fish and so forth that may have. So knowing that the company that you're getting your fish oil from is testing the oils for heavy metal is really important, because you, of course, don't want to be consuming that if you can avoid it. And also, again, that they're sourcing the fish from the cleanest places that they can. So this is one that's super important. Again, I typically use more professional grade things, but I don't have an affiliation with them, but Nordic Naturals is a nice over-the-counter brand that a lot of people
Good to know. That's the one that I use.
Yeah, they're pretty readily available, and they do a pretty good job with testing their product. And I will note too that I prefer, if folks are willing, to take cod liver oil instead of fish oil, because the cod liver oil is more of like a whole food version of a fish oil. I know it sounds gross, but typically there's a little bit of orange or lemon essential oil or flavor in there, so it's not as intolerable as it may sound. You'll get a little vitamin D and A that way as well, and a little bit more of a broad spectrum coverage. So
okay, would we take that? It comes as like an oil, like in like at Whole Foods, and then we take it by like tablespoon?
So they come in liquids. You can take them by the spoonful, and sometimes, and you can also get them encapsulated as well. It just kind of depends which brand or what specific product you're using. But most people, kind of a standard dose would be like a teaspoon or so a day.
Okay.
Usually.
Is there a benefit to taking it like by liquid or by capsule? Or is it just personal preference?
Not necessarily. I mean, if obviously the liquid's a little bit more direct, your body doesn't have to break down the capsule to get to it. But I find most people don't really have a problem with that. If you're burping up fish oil, some people do a little bit better with one versus the other, capsule or liquid, sort of the digestibility piece. In general, I would say having it with food is super helpful. So if you have food, have your fish oil or cod liver oil, and then continue eating to almost to like pack it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that reason, I usually have people do it in the morning, just so, if they're not lying down afterwards and more likely to potentially burping it up while they sleep or something. Yeah.
Okay. And for someone to find out that they're deficient in any sort of vitamins or minerals, essential minerals, would they just go to the doctor and just ask for like a general blood panel to be run, or how could we find out?
That's a great question. So yes and no. So you can do so standard blood work, for example, usually includes a CBC, which is a complete blood count. That looks at your red and white blood cells. Through the lens of how you interpret those labs, you can infer some nutritional deficiencies. So by looking at the size of the red blood cells, for example, the number, et cetera, you can infer some nutrition deficiencies. That's not commonly done in standard medicine, but more like functional medicine or naturopathic medicine would look at the lab ranges in a different way. Yes, you can use standard blood work to get some information. Also, like I mentioned, the vitamin D is pretty standard to run. Other things are a lot of specific vitamins and minerals are pretty difficult to test for in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
Your electrolytes are tested as part of what's called a complete metabolic panel. So CBC and CMP are kind of your two most standard lab tests that your primary care or whomever would run.
Mm-hmm.
The complete metabolic panel will test your major electrolytes. So we'll test your sodium and potassium and et cetera. So those are minerals.
Yeah.
Unless something is pretty wildly off, or I should say, unless something is kind of really going wrong in your body does just about everything it can to maintain those ranges, particularly of the electrolytes.
Okay.
So those are pretty uncommon for those to be outside the normal range, but they certainly can be, and it's definitely useful to get those labs checked.
Okay. What do you find that what do you just find that most people are most deficient in?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say probably the biggest thing, I have to pick two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say probably in the two things I supplement with, therefore most commonly, are B complex vitamins. So you have a whole family of vitamins that fall under the B category. And then also magnesium would probably be the other one.
Okay.
Magnesium, not so much in terms of seeing that on a lab test, but through clinical experience and people's symptoms that they come in with.
How would you know if you were deficient in one of the B, like the B complex or magnesium? What are some of those signs?
Good question. So with the B complex, I would say the biggest thing is usually low energy. But the Bs are super important for a lot of body processes, a handful of which correlate directly to your energy levels, a lot of which correlate to your liver function. So this is a big topic, but in a general sense, for example, everything's processed through your liver. So that includes your foods, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, et cetera. So to know if you maybe need to work on liver health overall, you can certainly test your liver enzymes, but from a more functional perspective, I'm looking at, okay, is there a hormone imbalance going on here? Are there skin issues? Are there signs that the body's just not processing things out and clearing things out well? Is there constipation? So I would say the biggest sign that maybe we need a little bit of support with the Bs would be low energy and potentially liver issues.
Okay. Yeah. I remember, this was really random, but in thing of Us Weekly, I used to read Us Weekly magazine all the time. And I remember Justin Timberlake was oh yeah, I told Madonna one time that I wasn't feeling good and she gave me a shot of B vitamin in the butt. Is that what it does? Is that if you're not feeling good, should you get a shot of B vitamins?
Great question. So I didn't read the article that I know of, but what he's probably referring to is vitamin B12 specifically. And B12 shots are pretty common these days. I personally don't do injection therapy, but I'm not opposed to it. The thing with getting a shot, obviously your body, it's going directly into your bloodstream. Easily utilized and absorbed by your body that way. it doesn't have to go through the digestive tract and get absorbed.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, again, do just fine taking it orally and absorbing it that way. But if you wanted to do B12 shot, that's your prerogative as well. Yeah. One thing I should mention too, while we're on the topic of B vitamins. So some things to look for with, I guess, supplements in general, particularly vitamins and minerals, is that you want to look for the natural version of things, right, as opposed to synthetic. So I like to say that we're not smarter than nature, right? So nature has created everything in just the way it needs to be in order for us to utilize foods and so forth and get the vitamins and minerals we need in the right form. Us trying to create that same process in a lab is less than ideal, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
So when you're buying your vitamins and minerals, look for things that are made from food, right? Because the food has already got these substances in their natural form. It's not a synthetic version that your body then needs to convert and create into the active form. So I mentioned the liver health a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
So that's more effort on the liver. The liver's got to take these basically precursors and transition them into the active form, right?
Yeah.
So a couple B vitamins where this is super important is going to be folate and B12. So a lot of people have heard of folic acid, right? We tell all our moms take folic acid, folic acid. So as we're finding out now, a lot of folks have a genetic issue where it's difficult for them to do a process that's called methylation. Not super important to know what this is. It's basically a biochemical reaction where your body's putting it's called a methyl group. It's basically like a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that gets attached to the vitamin in order to activate it. Okay, so if you've got folic acid, you need to take this methyl group, stick it on there, and now your body can use it.
Yeah.
That process is hard for a lot of people. So what can happen is they can have a buildup of folic acid without the puzzle piece attached, and it's just kind of sitting in your body and can create other agitation and so forth. So what I would recommend in order to hedge your bets that your body's getting, again, what it needs, is look for the natural form. So folic acid is synthetic. What you want is natural folate. Methylfolate in particular would be like the full name, or methyl tetrahydrofolate. It's a long word, but just look for folate, ATE, as opposed to
folic acid. Okay, that's extremely good to know.
Yeah, so it's a really important piece, and you'll find even in quality supplements, they're still putting folic acid often, and I would recommend to look for folate when you can.
Yeah.
Similar process happens with vitamin B12, and so I would recommend looking for methylcobalamin, which is active B12. As opposed to cyanocobalamin. That's the synthetic version.
Okay.
You'd want to avoid.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I feel like I am meeting more and more women all the time that come in as my clients, because I'm working with women that are like around 35 or just past 35, and a lot of us don't know it until we then discover it. We have issues with our thyroid. Are there supplements that you notice that really help an underactive, like hypothyroidism, versus hurt it?
Good question. So I work with thyroid a lot. I would say, and absolutely the majority of the women people I'm working with thyroid issues on are women. So again, we want to start with the lifestyle. Is stress being managed? Are we having, is nutrition on point, et cetera? So those pieces are really important. In particular, the thyroid gland is very sensitive. So it's one of the, in my opinion, one of the first glands to show signs if there's an issue of imbalance in the body. So signs of thyroid or underactive thyroid would be things like sluggishness, hair loss, constipation, skin issues, general sense of low energy, brain fog, things like that. So kind of like everything is underperforming a little bit, right? Everything sort of slows down when we're hypothyroid. And so like I mentioned, for example, B vitamins can be important for energy. They're also important important for thyroid function. There's a handful of minerals as well that are important in the process of thyroid hormone conversion. So you want to make sure that you're getting your substrates. Like iodine is super important because it's one of the building blocks of thyroid hormone. Okay. There's some debate on whether or not taking iodine can aggravate an underactive thyroid. In a general sense, my opinion is that it doesn't. And in fact, a lot of people benefit from it. But again, it depends on the person. You want to work with a practitioner who knows what they're doing. If you're going to be supplementing with things like iodine, but and again, the form that you're taking, et cetera. But a lot of folks, if they're eating a really healthy diet, they may not actually be getting much iodine in their diet because they're not utilizing like iodized salt, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm not recommending using that by any means. But what I would say is to consider looking at iodine as part of the whole picture. Another important mineral would be selenium that helps with thyroid hormone conversion. So there's a lot of nutritional pieces that come into thyroid function. There's a lot of, I find like food sensitivities can be a big issue for
definitely.
having thyroid issues. So a couple big ones that come up a lot for my women with thyroid problems is kind of the big three: soy, gluten, and dairy.
Yep, absolutely.
So that definitely comes up a lot. Again, it's not everyone's issue, but there's kind of like some big pieces that you can look at and places to start. So
yeah. If you could give like one best tip for somebody who is just kind of looking to see where they're at with things right now, or just wanting to take the first few steps in getting healthy, what would that be?
Yeah, I would start with a lifestyle. Absolutely. So I call it my 4 pillars of health. And I'm going to be putting together kind of a video series about this.
Yay!
Yeah, so I'll have to let you know, but super useful. Start looking at your sleep. So are you sleeping well? Are you waking rested? How many hours a night are you getting? How many hours a night do you need? Experiment with that, right? You may be someone who needs 7, you may be someone who needs 9 or 10, right? Everyone's a little bit different. So not everyone fits into that perfect 8 hours a night model. Look at, are you moving your body, right? Like we're meant to move. We're not meant to sit all day at a desk. So are there ways where you can put just movement into your day? Or are you doing some kind of active form of exercise regularly? Whatever it takes for you, but are you moving? What's your stress level like? Are you doing something to take some me time and do some self-care to kind of take a break from the go mode that a lot of us live a lot of our day in?
Yep. I want to do it all.
Yeah, exactly, which is great. But we need some time for respite and self-care too, right? And recovery. So that's kind of the nervous system balancing piece that I work with a lot of folks on. And of course, nutrition. What are you eating? What are you putting in your body? I think, I don't know, I have a hard time picking favorites, but getting enough sleep, making that a priority, and looking at what you're eating and putting in your body on a regular basis are probably the 2 first things I would start with. The body's amazing. It can recover from I've seen miraculous recoveries. It happens all the time, but it depends. What are the inputs that we're giving the system, right? So, I would definitely look at the food piece as well as part of that.
And I will definitely be interviewing you again on like healing the body, because I think like what you just said is it's amazing. And there are so many people who are like, oh, I'm just destined for a life of never being able to tolerate cheese, or, it's like, no, like you can really truly heal your body. It just takes some time.
Yeah.
It didn't break overnight.
Yeah. There's having faith and having hope are really important part of the healing process. But it's pretty cool. Once you get that level of whether it's chronic inflammation or whatever's going on for someone, once you can kind of get some of those fires put out, it's pretty cool what the body's capable of. And you may find something that you couldn't do or eat previously you're totally fine with now, or your level of energy is just through the roof. And so, yeah, there's a lot of benefit to, I think, taking some time out and trying to investigate what's going on for yourself, and find people to be on your team too, not just practitioners. Of course, obviously doing what I do, I think that's an important part, but I look at myself as just one member of the team, right? So who's at home that can support you? What girlfriends or friends or family members you have that can support you? Because it's hard to make lifestyle change and do all these things for yourself in a vacuum. So whoever you can get on your team to support you, and I know you have a great community doing that together. So joining communities like yours, I mean, it's huge. It's absolutely priceless, I think, as part of the whole process. So.
Yep, and I completely agree. Bridget, where can people find you? Because I feel like everyone's just going to want to continue to reach out. And I mean, obviously, if they're local, they can come into your office and see you. But where can we find you? Where can we find you online?
Yeah. So I will just say, if someone's not in Virginia and they're looking for a naturopathic doctor, most of the states have their own association for naturopathic physicians. So you can do some Google searching and typically find a local ND if you're looking for someone like myself. That being said, if you want to find me, I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Bridget Casey ND, and pretty easy to find. So you can search me out there. I'm always posting fun tips and ideas, and I'll be putting out some pretty cool content in the next few months. So keep your eyes peeled.
That's so exciting. All right. Well, thank you so much for your knowledge and your experience and talking to us today about topics that most of us know nothing about. So I feel like you have helped us tremendously. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye, guys.